Good afternoon again from the Rectory Garden. There isn't going to be a service put on YouTube today or a form of worship put up for you to follow at home, but what follows is more a sort of conversation really, addressing some of the queries that people have kindly made in the course of the videos that I put up over the last week or so. In front of me you can see some remarkable pieces of embroidery, and in just a moment I'll go and explain their significance, particularly at this time of year, but also their significance for me in my ministry as a priest in the Church of God. And then I'll just go on to address a couple of queries that people have made about the Church in this present situation in our national life, and a few other questions and queries about that first Easter and what might it have been like, and how it might have been observed in the early years of the Church. Well, again, I'll put some timings in the description box beneath this video, so if you want to avoid the autobiographical bit, you can skip forward to the kind of Q&A about the Church of England at the moment and Easter in the early Church and how it was marked. A couple of people picked up yesterday on the stole, which is the technical name for it, the stole that I was wearing over my cassock. It's called a stole because it comes from the Latin word stola, which is for towel. And as those of you may have heard in my address on Maundy Thursday, a stole is now a vestment. It's an article of clothing that's worn for a particular ritual purpose, but it also had a practical purpose in its origins. And you can imagine that on Maundy Thursday, a towel is a particularly appropriate piece of vesture to wear. This one is in the colour red, which is the colour that we use for Saints' Days. It's the colour that we use on Good Friday, and a colour that's also used for Passiontide. And this is a very, very fine piece of embroidery from the early years of the last century, and was given to me by a retired priest in my title parish, Canon Bill Goodman, who had trained as a priest at Kelham in Nottinghamshire, which was a monastery which also trained men for the Anglican priesthood. This is also of significance for me because it's not too far from Southall or Upton, where my late father, whose 5th anniversary of death is tomorrow, was at school. He was evacuated from London to Upton Hall, a country house not far from Kelham and Southall, and is now the home of the National Horological Institute, where they have an amazing array of clocks which would please my late father greatly. So this was given to me by Bill as an ordination present when I was ordained priest a year after I was made deacon. And I remember Bill with great affection, and I'll just hold up a little bit of it to the camera so you can see the remarkably fine nature of the embroidery. With sequins and gold thread and tassels. It's getting a little bit worn now, and I also have another red stole of my own that I bought when I was ordained, which I ordered from Whipple's. But this is a very, very special interest to me, and thank you for those that kindly drew attention to it yesterday. I'll just put this on the chair behind me. Now, this rather more modern stole is my ordination stole, and it was specially made for me by a lady called Christine Stainsby from her time at St George's Chapel, Windsor, when we were neighbours. I was a lay clerk in the choir there, and we became friendly, and her husband Derek was one of the residentiary canons. He, funnily enough, had been incumbent of St Chad Ladybarn for a very long time, and was sent, if you like, to the rather privileged but perhaps gilded cage of St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle as one of the canons. And they were very friendly to me, and it turned out that he'd been a priest in the Diocese of Norwich when I was a very, very tiny child. In fact, before I came to live in Norwich, when I was moved up from Sussex after I was adopted by my late parents, and he sort of knew all about that. And his parish church, funnily enough, from those days was the church in which my sister got married some years later. Ordination stoles can be autobiographical, and this is no exception. The bottom here I have the crossed keys of St. Peter, which are picked out in gold thread on various layers of silk. And this represents the church where my spiritual journey began, although I was unaware of it, when I was baptised in the great parish church of St. Peter Mancroft on the marketplace in Norwich. And the scallop shell represents the symbol of St. James, also the symbol of pilgrimage. And this is where I served my title as assistant curate in the teen parish of Louth, based in the great parish church of St. James's, with the tallest church steeple in the country. Marking a sort of halfway point between those marker points in my spiritual life was my time at the University of Durham, which is where I did my first degree. And at the nape here I have the cross of St. Cuthbert, a representation of the garnet encrusted cross that was found in St. Cuthbert's tomb. And this is where I came to really explore my vocation with the help of the late Canon Professor Stephen Sykes, and also it was my special privilege to come to know Lord Michael Ramsay, where he lived in retirement. As for the other symbols, those of you who have come to know me will know that I have been obsessed with Gothic architecture, and you can see the arc designs here with crossing arcs that mark out the fabric, that represent, if you like, the tracery in decorated Gothic stained glass windows. And the motif in the middle represents the tree of life, which was the shape of wrought iron on the doors that divided the old St. George's Chapel from the new St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. And much to my delight and joy, I found out some time later that this work of art was completed using the same sets of gold threads as Beraldine used in her iconic tapestries that can be found in the Rutland Chantry. So apologies for those of you purists who will note that I've not folded my stole correctly, but I hope that you can see it in all its glory. It's not something that I wear very often. However, in the few instances that I have worn it, maybe once or twice a year, so nearly 40 times now, it's getting a little bit worn. And come July, it will be the 20th anniversary of my ordination to the diaconate. I shall wear this tomorrow under the chasuble that I would normally wear that comes from the set of vestments from over the road at All Saints. There was a big sort of clear out of rather fine 19th century vestments about 40 years ago under my predecessor, Canon Bill Bryson, but we've been able to assemble other sets of vestments from daughter churches that have closed in the meantime and other sources. So if you have any more questions generally about clergy vesture or these particular vestments in particular, do please let me know. I've been asked what Easter might have been like for the very early churches, and the answer is we don't know, and there's been quite a lot of talk lately about, well, having to worship in our homes is just as the church had to do in its very, very earliest years. Well, the simplest and kindest answer to that is, well, really, it's not quite that simple. The reason why people worshipped in secret in their homes was because of fear of persecution. And sometimes that homes, even when they weren't being persecuted by the imperial authorities, were actually rather grand affairs led by, surprise, surprise, the people that had the money and thought they had quite a lot of the clout. The way in which we're worshipping at the moment is, in my view, quite unique. In fact, unique. Unique needs no qualification. So make the most of it. This is the first time, I believe, in Christian history that we're caused to worship in our homes in such a way. I've also been asked why, when the law doesn't prohibit it, why haven't I been going into church and praying there and recording or streaming services from there? Well, you're absolutely right. The law, even the coronavirus regulations at the moment, don't prohibit me from going into the church over the road, which legally is my property. There is nothing in law that prevents me from saying my prayers there. However, I have taken the Archbishop of Canterbury and York's polite but firm request very seriously, it's quite within my spirituality to allow sacramental worship and intercessory worship and prayer to be suspended in those places for now, because they are, after all, buildings. They're consecrated buildings, but they are first and foremost bricks and mortar. You and me are the church. So I'm anxious to be seen to be being helpful, and in that sense I think the Church of England is being required to set a good example. We might not like it, but I think it behoves us to be generous in our response at this extraordinary time. So what will church be like when we get back? Again, I don't know. I think it will be different. I think it will be different because certainly those of you that are tuning in and have been tuning in habitually will have got used to being more reliant on your own resources for worship. I hope it makes you take less for granted and treat as not so sort of familiar and common the words that we use in church, that they are written for a purpose and have been devised and distilled over many, many generations. I hope that it makes you a little bit more literate and confident in the forms of worship that we share when we gather and when we will gather again in our church buildings. And I think by virtue of the same principle of the Church of England setting a good example, I don't think the churches will be the first public buildings to reopen again once these quarantine restrictions are being lifted. I think we'll be required to set a good example and to continue that discipline and sacrifice, which hurts us greatly that we can't meet together, and I'm missing it very, very much indeed. So I think it behoves us to continue to dig deep, be sure that we are not alone, that when we are alone, it's not for very long. We just have to reach out our hands into the distance, into the near distance, and it will be picked up by Jesus Christ, whose glorious resurrection we celebrate very, very soon indeed. And so to tomorrow, because my phone doesn't have enough memory, and because we don't have 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel yet, I'm not able to live stream from my camera, nor am I able to get tomorrow's service in full captured on the phone's internal memory. So we will have our Easter celebrations from my study tomorrow, and we will renew our Easter baptismal vows. You will see the Paschal candle. There will be elements of the service that are slightly truncated. We won't be using all the readings, but in every other sense it will be a full celebration of that glorious Easter morn when Christ swallowed death up in his victory o'er the grave. And so now I'm going to read the prayer that we would be reading tonight at the Easter Vigil in anticipation of our celebrations tomorrow. Lord of all life and power, who through the mighty resurrection of your Son overcame the old order of sin and death to make all things new in him, grant that we, being dead to sin and alive to you in Jesus Christ, may reign with him in glory, to whom with you and the Holy Spirit be praise and honour and glory and might, now and in all eternity. Amen. And so, until tomorrow at 11 a.m, live from All Saints Rectory, I bid you a very good afternoon.